This video is going to look at long division with polynomials. And before we get started, I want to look at just a basic long division problem where if we have 113 divided by 2. Well, how do we look at this? We look at 2 goes into 1. Well, 2 won't divide into 1, so then we say 2 divides into 11 5 times. And then we take 5 times 2, which is 10. And then what's our next step? We subtract the 10, so that's 11 minus 10, so we end up with 1. And then we bring down the next number. We just bring the number straight down, so we end up with 13. So 2 divided into 13. Again, we're starting the whole process over. So we end up with 6. 6 times 2 is 12. And once again, we're going to subtract. So 13 minus 12 is 1. So now we end up with 56 and a remainder of 1, or we can write this as 56 and 1 divided by the 2, so we have 56 and 1/2. Now the reason I want to look at this example is because we're going to use basically the same steps when we divide our polynomial over here on the left. So we have 3x cubed minus 72 minus 16x squared, and that's all divided by x minus 6. So we're going to rewrite this with the x minus 6 out front, and then the polynomial here that we're going to put underneath, we need to make sure that we write it in descending order. So we're going to start with the 3x cubed, that's our largest exponent, and then we're going to look at the negative 16x squared. And notice we don't have an x term. So basically what that means is this polynomial is missing the x term, so that's just a 0x. So as a placeholder, I'm just going to add in a 0x, and then we have our negative 72. So the first step is you want to make sure that this trinomial here is in descending order. So we have x cubed, x squared, x to the first, and then there's no x. Now, when we look at dividing, we're going to take and simply look at the x. What do we need to multiply x by to get 3x cubed? Okay, we need to multiply the x by 3, so I'm going to put a 3 up here. And we also we have x cubed, we only have one x, so we need to multiply by an x squared. So if we take then, just like we did the 5, we took over here on the right, we took the 5 times 2 to get 10. So now we're going to take the 3x squared and multiply that by the x, and we're going to get 3x cubed. So now if you can't really see how we did this here, what do we need to multiply the x by to get 3x cubed? If you can't see where the 3x squared comes from, then you can go to the side and say, well, we have a 3x cubed. So if we have the 3x cubed, we want to divide this by the x that's out front. So if we do that, what's going to be left? Well, this is understood to be a 1, so 3 divided by 1 is simply 3. And then x cubed divided by x, this is x to the first. And when you divide, we subtract. So 3 minus 1 is 2, so you're left with 3x squared. So that's where the 3x squared is coming from on the top. Now, for me, instead of actually doing the division, I just simply say, what do we need to multiply the x by to get 3x cubed? And that would be the 3x squared. So we take 3x squared times x, and that gives us 3x cubed. Now, we also have to take the 3x squared and multiply it by the negative 6. So that's going to give us a negative 18x squared. All right, so now what did we do over here on the left? Once we had the 10 over here, we ended up subtracting. So over here, we have to do the same thing. Now, technically what this means is we would have a negative, and all of this would be in parentheses. Well, to make it easier, we're actually going to go ahead and distribute this negative throughout the 3x cubed minus 18x squared. So if we distribute the negative, that's going to make this a negative 3x cubed, and it's going to make this part a positive 18x squared. Now the reason we do that is because now we can simply add our terms together. 3x cubed and a negative 3x cubed, these are opposite signs and they cancel out. And this first term here should always cancel out, otherwise you've made a mistake. So then we have a negative 16x squared and a positive 18x squared, which would be 2x squared. So then what do we do next? Well, over here on the right, after we did the subtraction, we brought down the next term. We brought down the 3. So over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bring the 0x straight down, and we're going to start the whole process over. Again, we're going to look at the x here. What do we need to multiply x by to get the 2x squared? Well, we need to multiply by a 2, and we have an x squared, so we need to multiply the x by an x. So we need to multiply by 2x. So once again, 2x times x is 2x squared. And then multiply the 2x by the negative 6, and we get a negative 12x. And once again, we want to subtract, so we're going to take the negative through, so that's going to make this a negative 2x squared, and then the negative 12, that's going to become positive. And once again, this first term should always cancel. The negative 2x squared and the 2x squared cancel out. And then we have 0 and 12 is simply 12x. And then we repeat the whole process again. We're going to bring down the negative 72. And once again, we go through the whole process. What do we need to multiply the x by up here to get the 12x? Well, the only thing we need here is a positive 12. So 12 times x is 12x. And 12 times a negative 6 is a negative 72. And once again, we're going to distribute through a negative because we're subtracting, so that makes it a negative 12x and a positive 72. Again, this first term should cancel. And in this case, the second term, negative 72 and 72, also cancel, so that means we have a remainder of 0. And what does that mean if we have a remainder of 0? That means that the x minus 6 divides evenly. So what that tells us is that the x minus 6 is a factor. Okay, if it divides evenly, that means it's a factor of 3x cubed minus 16x squared minus 72. So now you can always check yourself. You can take the x minus 6 now and multiply it by the answer that we came up with, the 3x squared plus 2x plus 12. All right, let's try another example. And once again, you may want to pause the video to see if you can work this one out on your own. Once again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take the 3x minus 2 out front, and then that's going to be divided into the polynomial. And again, we want to make sure this is in descending order, so we're going to bring down the largest exponent, 6x cubed, then a negative 16x squared, plus 17x minus 6. So once again, we're going to start, what do we need to multiply the 3x by to end up with 6x cubed? Well, to get the 6, we need to multiply the 3 by 2. And then for the x cubed, we need to multiply the x by an x squared. So 2x squared times 3x is equal to 6x cubed. And keep in mind, once we multiply here by the 3x, we also need to multiply it by the negative 2. So we ended up with a negative 4x squared. And once again, we're going to multiply or distribute a negative here, so we change the signs. This first term cancels out, and then a negative 16x squared and a positive 4x squared, that becomes a negative 12x squared. And then we simply bring down the next term, which is a 17x. And then we repeat the whole process over again. What do we need to multiply the 3x by to get a negative 12x squared? Well, we know it's got to be a negative, and to get to 12, we need to multiply the 3 by 4, so negative 4, and then for the x squared, we need to multiply the x by another x. So negative 4x times negative 4x times 3x, would be a negative 12x squared. So we have a negative 12x squared. And also negative 4x times negative 2. So that makes it a positive 8x. And once again, we're going to have to multiply by the negative, so we're going to change the signs. So this makes it a positive, and then the 8x becomes a negative. Once again, the first terms here should cancel out. And we have 17x minus 8x, which is equal to a positive 9x. And once again, we bring down the next term, which is a negative 6, and we do the whole process again. What do we multiply the 3x by to get the 9x? And that is simply a positive 3. So 3 times 3x is 9x, and 3 times a negative 2 is a negative 6. And once again here, we're going to distribute the negative. So we end up with a negative 9x and a positive 6. The first term will cancel, and in this case, the second term cancels. And once again, we have a remainder of 0. And this is our answer, 2x squared minus 4x plus 3. And once again, that tells us that because we have a remainder of 0, that 3x minus 2 is a factor. And again, that means that it divides evenly. All right, our next example, we have x cubed plus 125 divided by x plus 5. So once again, I'm going to bring down the x plus 5, and we're going to divide that into x cubed plus 125. Now, remember, we want to put this in descending order, so we start with the largest exponent, which is x cubed. And notice we're missing an x squared, so again, I'm going to put in a 0x squared as a placeholder, and also a 0x because we're missing the x term, and then we bring down the positive 125. So now we can start dividing, and we're going to do the same thing. What do we need to multiply the x by to get x cubed? And that would simply be x squared, because we're going to take and multiply x squared times x, and we get x cubed. And then the x squared times a 5 would be 5x squared. And if you notice, why did we put the 0x squared here as a placeholder? Because now when we multiply and we get a 5x squared, your like terms match up. So now we want to subtract. So again, that means we're going to simply distribute a negative. So we get a negative here and also a negative 5x squared. And once again, the first terms cancel out. And then we are left with a negative 5x squared. Then we simply bring down the next term, which is 0x. And once again, we start over. What do we multiply x by to get a negative 5x squared? So that means we're going to need a negative 5 and also an x. So that's going to give us a negative 5x squared. And then a negative 5 and a positive would be a negative 25x. And once again, we change the sign. So we have a positive 5x squared and a positive 25. First terms cancel out. And then we're going to bring down the 25x. And then we bring down the next term, which is 125. And what do we multiply x by to get 25x? We need to multiply by a 25, so we add 25 here. So we get 25x, and then 25 times 5 is 125. And we're subtracting, so once again, we change the signs. And once again here, the first terms cancel, and 125, negative 125 also cancel. So again, we have a remainder of 0. So that also tells us that because of this remainder, that x plus 5 is a factor. Now, I do want to look at this example another way. I just want to show you that we could have looked at this a little different. If you have pretty good factoring skills, if you took the original problem here, we have x cubed plus 125. Well, 125 is a perfect cube, so I could write that as 5 cubed, because 5 cubed is 125, and this divided by x plus 5. Now, this is going to require you to remember, how do we factor here? We have a sum of cubes, and the way we factor that, that's going to factor to x plus 5, okay? And then you're going to square the first term, so that's x squared, and then it's minus 5 and x multiplied, so that's 5x, and then it's plus the last term, which is the 5 squared, so 5 squared is 25. So that's a special way that we can factor x cubed plus 5 cubed, and all of that is divided by x plus 5. And if you notice now, the x plus 5's cancel, and we're left with the exact same answer that we came up with over here. So this is a neat little technique. If you forget how to factor and cancel out, you can always divide here using long division, and you'll get the same answer. So that again shows you that x plus 5 is a factor of x cubed plus 125. All right, we have one more example to look at. And now we're dividing here by, instead of a binomial, here we're dividing by a trinomial. And this may look more complicated, but really it's the exact same process. So we're going to take again and write down the x squared minus x minus 3. And again, we want to have this in descending order. And the same thing for the x to the 4th plus 5x cubed minus 20x. So we have 4. And what did I leave out here? We have x to the 4th, x cubed. We don't have an x squared. So remember, we want to put in a placeholder, 0x squared minus 20x minus 16. And we're going to do the same process. What do we need to multiply the x squared by to get x to the 4th? And we need to multiply by an x squared. So I'm going to put the x squared here. So x squared times x squared is x to the 4th. And x squared times a negative x would be a negative x cubed. And then we also have to take the x times the negative 3, so that'd be a negative 3x squared. So that's the only difference. When you take the x squared, you have to multiply that by the x squared, the negative x, and the negative 3. And once again, now we're going to subtract. So that means we have to change the sign. So we have a negative x to the 4th, positive x cubed, and a positive 3x squared. Once again, the first term should cancel out. If not, you've made a mistake. And now we have 5x cubed plus x cubed, which is 6x cubed. And then we simply have 0 and 3x squared, so that's going to be a positive 3x squared. And we simply bring down the next term, which is a negative 20x. And we start the whole process again. What do we multiply the x squared by to get this 6x cubed? Well, obviously we're going to need a 6. And if we have an x cubed and we have the x squared, we need to multiply by an x. So then we're going to take 6x and x squared is going to give us 6x cubed. And now remember, the 6x is also multiplied by the negative x. So that's going to give us a negative 6x squared. And then 6x times a negative 3 would be a negative 18x. And we're going to change the signs. So we have a negative here, this becomes a positive, and the last one becomes a positive. And again, the 6x cubes cancel out. And then we have 9x squared, and then a negative 2x. And now what do we need to multiply the x squared by to get 9x squared? And that is simply a positive 9. So 9 times x squared, we get 9x squared. 9 times a negative x is a negative 9x. And here, notice I forgot to bring down the next term, which was a negative 16. So 9 times negative 3 would be a negative 27. And we're going to change the signs once more. First term cancels out. And now we end up with 7x and then plus 11. So this time we do not end up with a 0 for the remainder. So now we're going to take this remainder and go up here and say plus 7x plus 11 divided by the x squared minus x minus 3. So here is our answer. We're just simply going to add on this remainder of 7x plus 11 over x squared minus x minus 3. And that's the same thing we did up here with our regular division problem when we ended up with 56 and 1/2. We simply took the remainder of 1 and divided that by our 2. So that's exactly the same process that we did with this example. So in this case, this tells us that the x squared minus x minus 3 is not a factor because it did not divide evenly.